2020, and most of these webinars are also available on the AFINet website. And so far we had 12 webinars, and I'd also would like to announce a planned AFINet conference, which will take place at the end of September, and we will keep all AFINet members updated. So if you're not already an AFINet member, I would strongly encourage you to become one, since membership is free and will offer you the opportunity to exchange with other colleagues in the field. And the webinars we are offering, they are also free, which is important for us. But since we are a small charity, we would really welcome if people who are able to do so would donate a small amount for each webinar, and further information can be found on the website. I would also like to thank Alex Helfer and Jim and Richard Wellerman, without whom these webinars wouldn't be possible. And I'm very happy today to introduce researchers and practitioners from Australia. Today's talk will be shared by Peter Kelly and Dan Raffel. Peter is a professor based at the University of Wollongong in Australia, and he's the director of the Center for Health, Psychology, Practice and Research. And his research is focused on the development, implementation, and evaluation of evidence-based approaches within mental health and substance dependence treatment settings. And he also has got a special emphasis on interventions targeting family members. And Dan Raffel is the Senior National Program Manager and Trainer with Smart Recovery Australia. And originally coming from Scotland, he has 18 years of experience in addiction recovery, peer education, youth and homeless sector in the UK and Australia. He's got several degrees, including an honors degree in addiction studies, diplomas in integrated counseling, cognitive behavior therapy, and certificates in mental health and social care. And well, as he will tell you himself, he's got a strong passion for seeing people who are experiencing addictive behaviors to gain more control over their lives. And his desire is to see participants equipped with necessary tools and strategies and being empowered to live more balanced and fulfilled. And this has been validated through his own journey and lived experience of addiction many years ago. And today, Pete and Dan will talk about Smart Australia and its Family and Friends program. The talk will take about 50 minutes, and afterwards there will be space for discussion and remarks. And so it's a real pleasure to have you both here, and I would like now to hand over to you, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and yeah, thanks for inviting us along for this presentation. Just share my screen. There we go. There we go. Just let me know if there's any sound or audio or visual problems, but hopefully we can just push ahead. So yeah, thank you for the introductions. My name's Pete. I'm from the University of Wollongong. Not sure how familiar people are with Wollongong, but it's about, depending on traffic, it's about an hour-and-a-half drive from the Sydney Opera House on the south coast of New South Wales. So I'm presenting from here, and Dan, who's from Smart Recovery, is up in Queensland. So we'll kind of get back and forth a little bit through this presentation. In terms of what we're presenting today, we're really presenting a feasibility study, and it's a study that's only just finished. We've just finished our final follow-up in just the last couple of weeks. So what we're going to be presenting today is just some really early findings. None of this has been peer reviewed yet, although we certainly intend to write some of this work up for publication. So take it all with a grain of salt. They're early findings, but hopefully there's of some interest to people out there. And as Gallus was saying, if you've got any questions, don't hesitate to put them in the chat, or I'm sure there'll be some time for questions at the end of this. Just wanted to pause and just acknowledge the traditional owners of the land here, and where we're working, the Aboriginal people, but likewise the traditional owners or custodians of the land where you might be sitting right now. And that's just a shot there of the Wollongong coastline. In terms of acknowledgements, I really wanted to give a big acknowledgement to our funding body, the National Centre for Clinical Research on Emerging Drugs, or NCRED, as we would call it here in Australia. They've been really generous with their support of this study and a number of studies that really focus on methamphetamine use here in Australia. And I'll talk to that a little bit more as we go. And likewise, really wanted to acknowledge Smart Recovery. As you'll hear from Dan today, research, like the idea to do this study and actually conducting it and designing it, and the analysis and these presentations has really been a collaborative approach between a number of universities and Smart Recovery, and really appreciate the support that they provide, and really enjoy working with Smart Recovery. It's an organisation that's very committed to evidence and research and understanding how their programs might be working. So thank you, Smart Recovery. I promise this is my last slide of giving thank yous, but just wanted to acknowledge whenever you do studies like this, there's always a much bigger team that are involved, all the way through designing the projects to hands on the ground, doing the work and helping to deliver the groups, or helping to collect the data. In particular, I'd really like to give a big thank you to Tamsin Thomas, who's based down here at the University of Wollongong, who's just been instrumental in helping to keep this project on track, collecting the data, and did a lot of the analysis that you'll see as part of this presentation. But yeah, big thank you to everyone involved. In terms of background to this study, so here in Australia and potentially in regions where you might be living right now, harms related to methamphetamine use are increasing, and that's something that we're certainly seeing here in Australia. So NCRED was a funding body that was ultimately funded to try and help address the harms associated with methamphetamine use here in Australia. And so they provided funding specifically to do studies that were considering methamphetamine and its impact on the person who might be using methamphetamine, but also family and friends and society more broadly. As as acknowledged and is pretty self-evident, methamphetamine use certainly has an impact on the person who is using the methamphetamine, but it tends to have some ripple effects across family members, friends, and supporters. And that was really the aim of this study, was to not so much think about the person who was using the substance, but to think about the family members who were impacted by that use. When we're thinking about definitions, think broadest definition. So when we're family members, friends, supporters, anyone that would really identify themselves as being, a significant person in relation to someone who might be using methamphetamine, was invited and welcome to be involved as part of this study. So really the aim of this research was to examine the feasibility of a group program that was already developed by Smart Recovery Australia, called the Smart Family and Friends Program. And that program had been in operation for a number of years on a smaller scale, and really hadn't had a lot of research happening. And so the idea was to look at whether or not the groups were feasible, acceptable, of value to people who were impacted by methamphetamine. So before we get into the study, I might pass over to Dan, who's from Smart Recovery Australia, who's going to spend a bit of time talking about what Smart Recovery is more broadly. And Smart Recovery is an organisation that's available throughout the world. So there's obviously a number of groups here in Australia, but there's groups throughout Europe and throughout the US. So Dan will talk about that, and then he'll talk a bit more specifically about the Family and Friends program. But before we pass it over to him, I might just show just a really short clip introducing smart recovery.
How do you cope with the stresses of life? Many of us manage using alcohol and other drugs. Or maybe gambling gives you some relief. While getting control of addictive behaviours can seem overwhelming, making healthy changes doesn't have to be an all or nothing approach. You can improve your lifestyle in a way that works for you through free practical support groups at Smart Recovery. Set weekly goals that work for you. For some people, that might mean winding back to a more manageable use, whether that's some or none. Connect with our safe and non-judgmental support groups, either in person or online, and learn practical, evidence-based tools to move forward with your life in a way that works for you. Choose your own path to a healthier future at smartrecoveryaustralia.com.au.
All right, I'm going to pass over to you now, Dan. Just let me know when you're ready to change the slides.
Okay, thank you very much for having us on board, and actually see a few people joining us from Australia. I recognise a few names there, folks we've worked with, Mark and Nea and Tori, some actually involved in the SMART program over here, so that's great that you guys can join us. Maybe they should do the presentation because they're the grassroots people. I'm not going to bore you with the research. Sorry, I didn't mean it was boring, Pierre. But you will spend time on the research. I'm a grassroots kind of guy, so yeah, I'd love to just explain a little bit about SMART recovery in essence before we get into the family friends side of it. And to be honest, when I started working for SMART Recovery 5 years ago, I didn't know or I've never heard of it before. Even though I was come from the UK, it was fairly new to me 5.5 years ago when I started working for them. But it is a worldwide self-management mutual aid support program. So we're all very familiar with AA and 12 steps. This is really the only other alternative that's out there. And I say, I don't even like using the word alternative because we're not in opposition. We're looking for anything that helps people move forward in life. But it's probably the only global kind of program that is available other than that. And the true emphasis is on self-management. The participants that are attending these meetings, whether it's face-to-face or online, are the experts in themselves. And as we'll see when we're talking about how we train facilitators, they're there to guide and allow people to self-manage and take control of their own behaviours and be the experts in their own life. And then the mutual aid aspect, which you'll be familiar with groups, that really has a lot of research around supporting people to make positive changes. And as I said, whatever that recovery journey looks like, now, traditionally as well, we're talking about alcohol or drugs, but at Smart Recovery, we also are trying to broaden that word. And you know, we talk about life beyond addiction, but sometimes people don't even identify with that because there may be issues around smoking or food, or me in the last year, Netflix and chocolate binges. You know, it could be any behavior that you're finding unhelpful or it's getting in the way of you fulfilling what you want. You know, I'm sure some of you have still got your gym membership tucked away in your office drawer after New Year's resolutions. So get back into the gym. If not, attend a SMART meeting and the participants will help you. But that's what I love about it, and that it can be any behavior. And I think the most crazy one I've come across, well, not crazy, but when I did a check-in, they said they're addicted to Sudoku. And I was like, oh, well, what a group I'm going to get here. But when we unpacked and we journeyed with them, that was just the output. He was an older gentleman. Instead of escaping to drugs or alcohol or gaming, he escaped to do puzzles in his study because he was trying to run away from this conflict in his marriage because he was a hoarder and his house is a mess. So we dig around it and we start seeing there's actually quite a lot of normal processes that people are dealing with, no matter what the output or the behavior that they are drawn to that makes sense to them and manage through their day. When you break it all down, we're really just all the same, whether it is my Netflix and chocolate or something, you know, significant like methamphetamine. So it's based on, which is a very evidence-based philosophy and principles of cognitive behavioral therapy and MI. A lot of the CBT are the kind of aspects of the tools, like the cost-benefit types tools and the ABCs of CBT, and different tools that are integrated into it. And then the kind of way that facilitators engage those participants through motivational interviewing style, kind of curiosity questioning, you know, that kind of exploration thing, which is proven to be really effective when it comes to self-management, because we're not there to tell them what to do, we're there to guide them. And as we know, that you may not know, but the word facilitate literally means to ease the process. So in the 4-point program in Smart Recovery, as you'll see, we look at just these kind of 4 areas that kind of inform a lot of the decisions, which you know, is building and maintaining motivation, coping with urges and cravings, problem solving, and looking at strategies, and also a lifestyle balance, which I'm sure we can all relate to. When we talk about harm minimization, it's always a bit of a tricky one to touch on, especially worldwide, because we find that the word recovery or harm minimization can be in conflict to some people. In America or parts of Russia, I've just been looking to do training in Russia online, and harm minimization is illegal in some of the conversations they have. So it's a really interesting one. But in Australia, we see harm minimization as a spectrum, and abstinence can be at one end, and use can be at that end. And wherever you choose to be in your life is entirely up to you. And sometimes it's about reducing the harm if you want to continue with certain behaviors. As I say, it may not be drugs or alcohol, it can be anything that you need to maintain, but actually get more control over. I do ask that question sometimes if we were talking about abstinence only, and I had someone come to my group that had an eating addiction or some food addictions, am I going to tell them that they can't ever eat again? It does not make sense. Or I've had directors of companies that are stressed out and they're abusing their prescription medication, but they need it. So they need to gain more control over it, or it could be anything, you know, sexual health, or, you know, anything that people can bring to these groups. They are free weekly meetings, either face-to-face or online. And the lovely COVID, I hate that post-COVID, pre-COVID conversation we have now, but we had about 360 groups running face-to-face and only 6 online. Now that flipped to, well, who knows how many face-to-face, probably 0 at one point in Australia, but we had up to 70 plus online meetings, and I know some of the guys in the group now that are watching were a big part of keeping that sustaining over COVID, so thank you for that. And they're run by trained facilitators, so in each of the countries that are the affiliates of Smart Recovery, the main players, USA, the UK, Denmark, Ireland, they run through the online training in America, but we provide face-to-face and online training modules. But everyone that runs these sessions and these courses are trained facilitators. It's normally a 2-day training course. Yeah. So family and friends. So the normal Smart Recovery was developed in Australia in 2004. It went back to 1994, I think, in the US. But during those first 5 years, we obviously realised that it wasn't just the participants themselves that were having these issues and the problems, and we had a lot of family members calling up for support. And you know, the researchers and the people who were involved, and Josette, as you can see on the screen, who is pretty much Mrs. Smart Recovery. She's got this moody look on her face. She's not always moody. She's normally quite happy. But she's now retired and ambassador, but she pretty much brought Smart Recovery to Australia and then helped develop this family and friends program, and when it launched in 2009. And because it's slightly different, the normal Smart program, I even call it a program, but there's not a start date and an end date to Smart Recovery. You come as long as you want. It's 1 session or 2 years. We don't want to create dependence long term, but how long is a piece of string? How long do people need to get into that maintenance and probably that termination phase of addictive behaviours? Who knows? But family and friends were developed, and that we may only have a short time with these family members, and they were bringing different issues that they were needing to explore. So it was devised as an 8-session course, and I'll show you just the session outline in a little second. So we do run periodic courses. We do have organisations who are in the chat who run also weekly meetings that are not necessarily sticking to 8 sessions, but they will use that informed content weekly, week in and week out. But for most, what we do deliver is an 8-session course, and some of the research that Peter's talking about, but also a new piece of research that I'll drop into the chat, which I'd love to get involved in, runs on an 8-session course, which I'll show you that outline in a second. So I guess, again, it's equipping them with a toolkit. I always like using the analogy, and probably we've forgotten what that was like traveling on a plane, but putting your own oxygen mask on before helping someone else. And, you know, we find a lot of the family members and people that are in distress as loved ones coming, and initially they're like, give me some ideas and tips to get Jimmy off drugs. But it's like, well, that's not what it's about. Actually, it's about you putting your own oxygen mask on, creating a safe space for you, managing your responses to the psychological distress that you're experiencing through someone else's challenges, and trying to just equip them with a toolkit to manage that. And what it does is it creates that environment. It keeps them safe and from harm. It protects the home, and it creates a space for different conversations, I've found. And, you know, maybe Mark or those are now soon to be, you know, you find that these family members take a bit of control back in their life, and then that allows them to have more controlled conversations, more controlled responses to the loved one's chaos, you know. And then we find that sometimes that change that people see in their parents or whoever it is, you know, isn't curious, then it might help them create a space where they're ready to change and see some changes in each other. And we also have had family members do it together collaboratively. One attends Smart Friends, one attends Normal Smart, and it's a really collaborative effort for the family, which is fantastic. And it's influenced by the 5-step model, the stress, strain, coping support model, which we're all familiar with the wonderful Richard Bellman in our midst. So, Peter? And so just a quick outline, and this was a new slide I just gave Peter about 5 minutes ago. I was like, oh, hold on, I just want to quickly outline the sessions that we do run and why they were important. So obviously, without motivation, we have nothing. We have no change whatsoever. Prior to that is an awareness that there's an issue. But I think with family members, they do know that there's an issue, do have an awareness. However, what I find is they have an awareness over Jimmy having an issue, but they don't always have an awareness that it's sometimes their issue and sometimes their lack of skills and the abilities that they have. And that's a wake-up call for some people, that it's about them. So it's self-managing you and not them. So finding the motivation to want to change is a key part of that. As we know, looking to develop self-care, support, rewards, and then understanding some of the tools that come with CBT. I don't know, some therapeutic processes you go into, and it's like this mystical kind of tools that people use on you. We don't want it. We want you to know all of them. We will give you them all. They're on the website. Go away and self-manage them. Use these tools. Try and improve your week-to-week kind of process and use these tools. And same as for family members. We do have, as you see on our website, if you check it out, manuals. Go to the Smart Recovery Australia website because you may get something slightly different in some of the countries. But we do have manuals for family and friends, people that are come to seek support that can't maybe attend these programs, and also participant manuals that people can just purchase and use without even turning up to a meeting, and it can still be super helpful. Anyway, looking at the ABCs, the kind of some of the tools that are all through this, assertive communication, very key. You know, not really giving in and really being able to communicate your needs in that distressful kind of relationship that you can find is really key, and practicing those, rehearsing them with your peers and mutual aid, you know, family members in that space is really important. And problem solving and making better choices in the midst of that, looking after yourself, but coping with lapses. And again, that's not necessarily just coping with Jimmy's relapses or your son's relapses. It's about you regressing in your behaviors and giving back into some of those unhelpful cycles. Maybe you're kicking your son out, or you keep giving money to him, and rather than that, you look for different ways of, well, rather than giving you money, I'll pay for groceries, or I'll give you a lift rather than a lift. That's very Scottish. I'll give you a ride to your destination, or rather than giving you money for a taxi or letting you borrow the car that you smashed up last month. You know, so looking for different ways to problem solve, but also if you end up regressing and having lapses, and even then, I think we have to be mindful of language. I don't really like the idea of relapse and lapse. I just think of it as just behavior. And if it's unhelpful for you, it's unhelpful for you. When we get caught in this lapse, relapse, abstinence, or nothing, sometimes it can be very black and white, and also quite detrimental if people don't match up to the standards that some people expect on them. So part of mistakes in life is who defines us. Myself, as I say, been through heroin and methadone recovery years ago. That for me is my training. It's not a mistake. I'm so glad I went through it in some ways. And people can make mistakes week in, week out, come to SMART. That is where we learn. We don't learn when we're all having a rosy time putting our feet up at the beach. We learn when a rubber hits the road and we make mistakes and we bounce back and we learn and we adapt and we evolve. So keeping safe and seeking support is a big part of that mutual aid. As you'll see a bit of a testimonial video coming up. A lot of these groups then continue keeping in touch sometimes. Some have created Facebook networks and different things to keep that support, which is fantastic. And then goal setting is a real key part of Smart Recovery. It's a weekly based 7 days. What are you going to try this week? One thing, one small thing. And we didn't coin the phrase, but you may know, SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic in time. What are you going to try this week? Just one thing to try and progress forward and so make some changes there. So that's really key to it. So I'll just play a little slide here. So this is a testimony of a family member that came through one of the SMART programs. And I think it's just really powerful to remind ourselves firsthand rather than myself and Peter blabbing on. So let's just play that. You might be on mute, Pete. Rewind, unmute. There you go. how often are we still on Zoom and Teams and we still do it? You know, this is the world we live in now.
Sorry, Dan. Here we go.
I am extremely grateful for this experience. It's been a game changer for me and my mother. We have been to various AOD family support groups, but none quite like the SMART Family and Friends program, because this one was different. This one was about us. My mum had just come out of a particularly stressful period of having my 23-year-old daughter living with her temporarily. And my mum's 80, so she did a pretty amazing job. She has a complex relationship with methamphetamine, an array of prescription medications, including the dreaded Seroquel, and also regularly uses alcohol to manage, I think, her life and her varied mental health issues. I really loved the professional and safe way the group was set up. I really, really loved that it was evidence-based, secular and non-judgmental. Some of the topics that I really connected with were the assertive communication, learning all about the I statements, problem solving, reframing thoughts, because I tend to beat myself up when I'm managing a crisis situation or I'm in a stressful moment, and I reflect on what I've said and what I've done, and I often think, oh, I shouldn't have done that. You know, she was substance affected, and that unhelpful thinking was not a good thing and something that I learned to address. I'm also now acutely aware of my own well-being and what detracts from it. You know, things such as emergency room visits, bouts of homelessness, being kicked out of crisis youth refuges during a pandemic, 2 a.m. doorbell rings or phone calls in crisis, all the things that take away from my own well-being. Learning that I didn't cause it, I can't cure it, and I can't control it was really powerful, and we often remind ourselves in our group chats. And most importantly, building support networks and finding this as a support network, because our group has remained in contact via a Facebook group, and we regularly check in on each other and see how we're travelling. Until you've lived that situation, it's really hard to fully understand what it's like for people in our situation.
Awesome. I'm going to skip through this. This is the 4 points I talked about. Please go onto our website because I'm just mindful of time and Peter might have a lot to get through. I'll skip through the next couple of slides very quickly. So just flick on, Peter. So as as maybe very familiar with this, getting to know that family member and the problem is very key. So just giving them a space week in, week out through these 8 sessions in a non-judgmental setting is really important. And providing relevant, specific, targeted information, which a lot of our manuals that we have and maybe some of the services that represent the Smart Recovery and Family and Friends also have additional information maybe that they can provide. And exploring and discussing coping behaviours, including how they respond. So as we said, it's how they respond to psychological distress is the essence of CBT. It's not the event that it should cause it, it's how our coping skills behind it. And just in cancelling the supports is really key, and looking for further supports. Now, briefly on the next couple of slides, and I'll pass over. The next one, Peter. Cool. So managing emotional upsets, helping them just process that kind of maladaptive or that unhelpful thinking, and trying to work through using these tools to try and manage that cognitive process a little differently. Improving communication, setting boundaries, which is a huge one, and being able to assertively do that, which is really challenging for family members. And just really developing those support systems and having that balance, which is key through any aspect of life. Hands up, everybody that has a perfectly balanced life here. Yeah, no one. So I think all of us can attend Smart Recovery and benefit from it, and gain and cope when we gain more control. So as you may have heard, there's a few things there. The 3 Ps that we work from: practice, patience, persistence, building that resilience that you will never, ever just be perfect. There's always a learning curve. And I ran a webinar with Dr. Bill Miller, who pretty much invented with Stephen Rolnick motivational interviewing. And he said he was still learning motivational interviewing. I thought, what an encouragement to us all that the person that invented it is still learning this. So even us as clinicians have to wake up and pay attention to that, I think. And the 4 Cs, as you've heard from that testimony, these family members, they didn't cause it, they can't cure it, they can't control it. All you can do is cope with it. And I've had that personally, even in my wife's family, where her cousin over in New Zealand has meth issues, and I had her uncles calling me of what have I done, my upbringing and the way I treated him as a child, and I think I go through this process with him as well. So very, very valuable to support that space. And the last slide before I'll chuck on there is just really the 2 pieces, obviously, the NCRED grant project that Peter's going to talk about. But I've just dropped into the chat there this other section here. This is a current one, the Australia Drug Foundation. And I know that Nea, who's in the chat, is going to be part of that. But we've just trained 26 facilitators, 24 facilitators. In the month of March, we're trying to put an expression of interest out. Now, this is not for facilitators, but for family members. Now, we've been told that we can put it out internationally. So if you have family members that you're working with, and in the next week or 2, don't miss the boat, please join on that link. It's an expression of interest that will direct you to Alison Beck, Dr. Alison Beck, who's the researcher, who may be able to connect you with some of these groups, these 8-session courses that we're going to be running in Australia. Granted, you might have to get up at a random time in the night, but you know what? If you're getting woken up at 2 in the morning, the doorbell rings, then you're going to be up anyway. But anyway, I'm joking. But hopefully you can look at that and see if there's any interest. We'd love you to get involved and make sure we've got a decent amount of a cohort demographic there for the research. I think that's my slides. So thank you for listening. Please join. Go to the Smart Recovery Australia website as well if you want any further information. And yeah, I'm happy for my email address to be passed on to anyone as well. So Peter.
Stan, that was great. Really, really helpful summary of Smart Recovery and the Smart Family and Friends program. So I wanted to, just I guess bring this presentation home with talking about the study that we've really just recently finished, looking at the feasibility and just some early effectiveness indicators of the Smart Family and Friends program. And as I said before, it's focused on methamphetamine. In terms of the study design, we did some pre and post assessments, and then we did 1 month follow-up, and I'll present some of those results today. Our target for the feasibility study was to deliver 5 community-based groups across Australia. And so what is kind of a common and kind of increasingly boring story is we originally wanted to deliver these in the community across multiple Australian states where people would, come into a group room and complete the program. Unfortunately, COVID hit, and then we were forced to rethink the study. We waited for a little while thinking maybe COVID would blow over. It didn't. And then we made the decision to move to delivering these groups online. I should say the research team were incredibly nervous about delivering these groups online. I think all of the previous experience that Smart Recovery had involved delivering these groups face-to-face. And we were unsure about recruitment numbers and how well it would take. So it turned out to be sort of quite an interesting study to be looking at it from that perspective. So in terms of the results, really pleasingly, we were able to run the 5 groups. So across the 5 groups, we had 45 people that completed the assessment procedures and agreed to be in the groups. We were able to recruit all of the participants through the Smart Recovery Australia website. And that was really encouraging, both in terms of being able to get the study done, but also thinking about future dissemination of this work and the ongoing use of the groups. I think we'd initially anticipated that we might need to go to some national media outlets and do some news stories to try and get the numbers. But it was really encouraging to think just through some advertising on the website, we're able to get the numbers. 89% of the participants were impacted by methamphetamine use of a family or friend. As I said before, that was really what we were funded to do. And that's how we targeted our advertising. We were a little unsure if we'd be able to get that proportion of people impacted by methamphetamine, but yeah, we're quite pleased that we did. And then we absolutely didn't turn anyone away. And so that kind of accounts for the other 11%. In terms of the delivery of the groups, Ange Argent, who was working at Smart Recovery at the time and was a big champion of this research study, was the person that delivered all of the groups online. We had a research assistant, we had a couple of different research assistants who sat in on those groups and then went through a checklist, looking at the manual, the Smart Recovery Family and Friends manual, and went through to see if certain aspects of those groups were being delivered. And what was really encouraging is there was really high fidelity, really strong consistency across the delivery of those groups online. In terms of participant engagement, which is a really important feasibility outcome to be looking at, 44 people commenced the group. So of the 45 people that we recruited, 44 commenced the groups. There were about 6 people who didn't engage, so about 13% who attended 2 or less groups. It's hard to work out if that's a good number or a bad number. We were really pleased. I think if we were running the groups face to face, we still would have had at least 13% of people who didn't engage. So it was really quite pleasing to have that level of engagement, particularly during the time that we were delivering this program. Was a time of lots of lockdowns here in Australia. Homeschooling was happening. COVID vaccinations were kind of in the process of happening. So there were a lot of changes. So we're really pleased that 87% of people, 39 people regularly attended the groups. And on average, people attended sort of 6.8 sessions out of the 8 sessions that were provided. So really encouraging outcomes from a feasibility perspective. In terms of the some of the quantitative results from the questionnaires, here's the column that maybe you wanted to focus on. In terms of the outcomes, positive changes. So we're looking at doing assessments prior to people commencing the groups and then at 1 month follow-up. And we're seeing statistically significant improvements on psychological distress, quality of life, and the perception of burden that the person was experiencing. So once again, small sample sizes and t-tests looking at these kind of pre-follow-up results, but encouraging from a feasibility perspective. Some longer term follow-up would obviously be important. We also did qualitative interviews with participants to get a sense of how they participated in the groups, what they got out of it, and what they really took away from it. And you'll see a few themes across these next couple of slides. I think what was encouraging from the I guess the philosophy of the program, or the theoretical underpinnings of the Smart Family and Friends program, is a lot of the things that people were talking about are really reflected in the manuals or the focus of those groups. So there was this theme around development and of strategies to cope with family members. So for example, around setting boundaries and being clear and feeling empowered to be able to establish boundaries. but also thinking about, compromising in establishing boundaries and, working out boundaries that are helpful to both the family member and also the person who was using. So, an example of a quote: "I don't give her money anymore, but I'll help her pay for her petrol," that type of thing. Likewise, people, reporting that it's been really helpful in terms of developing strategies to cope with conflict. So, leaving, not when anger's happening and then coming back and having those discussions. So I told him we should wait until we were both calm before we talk, so we didn't have a fight. So some really basic coping strategies that can be really impactful when used in the right way. One of the other themes was around changing attitudes towards the family member. So this idea of, I guess, sort of reframing this idea of dependence and what's happening for the person. So drug use is a behaviour that he does, but he is so much more than that. So being able to see the person as more than their substance use, or likewise, having this understanding that dependence isn't something that can just be fixed straight away. That it does happen over a longer period of time. Which kind of runs into this next bit around this sort of acceptance of the current situation. So learning that I can't control his behaviour, our relationship is better if I don't. Using drugs or alcohol is just their way of trying to cope. So having a better understanding of what's happening for the individual, and that having positive, impacts on the family member or the friend who's impacted. The next slide. The next slide focuses a bit more on the experiences of people involved in these groups, and what their experience has been in going to the online groups. One of the things that came through is this idea of sort of decreased loneliness and social isolation. So making connections in the group. I realised I'm not the only person going through this. It's been wonderful making friends in the group, people who can understand and validate my experience. So this sense that it's not just you going through this, that there's a lot of people who are going through it and they can really support each other in this process. I think in terms of future directions for these groups, and this might be something for Dan and his team to think about and think about how it can be facilitated, but what happens after these 8-session groups, and is there a way of engaging people longer term in the Smart Family and Friends program, which I think is particularly important. In terms of the group format and content, this is an interesting one, difficult content. So it was common for people to talk about the content as being exhausting or triggering. Which is, I guess, validation that people are engaged in the groups and are working for the groups and talking about some difficult issues. I think, as this person has said, however, it has to be that way if you're talking about these things. So kind of an acceptance that the groups are difficult and potentially emotionally challenging, but there's it's worth it, I think, is the general message that we're getting across from people. It was common for people to sort of say, look, it was hard or impossible to go back to work, or they just needed to go for a walk or clear their head or spend a bit of time after these groups. In terms of the online aspect of the groups, pretty much universally positive from the members that participated. Of course, there's a self-selection aspect to it, so people knew that the groups were going to be delivered online. And so the people sort of signing up were already, I guess, willing to do that. We were concerned about dropout along the way, but people did stay engaged. I think that's a big result of Ange, who was delivering the groups, and likewise the relevance and the applicability of the program to individuals. So it was really encouraging that we could deliver it online. And I think particularly here in Australia, which is such a big country, it really provides opportunities to increase the reach of these types of programs and potentially in other places around the world. So that's it in terms of the results. I just wanted to flag this really quickly, and then I'll give a conclusion. Smart Recovery as an organisation is really interested in research and promoting research. And there's researchers now from across the world, United States, UK, Hong Kong, here in Australia, who have come together to establish the Smart Recovery International Global Research Network. So it's really bringing together research and really encouraging and prioritising research in smart recovery and smart family and friends program. So if you've got an interest in that, you can see the website here. You're more than welcome to email me, and I can send that through. Likewise, if you go to the Smart Recovery International website, you'll be able to find details around there. So if you're interested in joining, it's free. You're more than welcome to. So just in conclusion, in terms of the study, it was encouraging. It was absolutely feasible to deliver the groups online. The group aspect, when people reflected and talked about the groups, they really valued the group aspect, which could still be delivered in an online delivery, which was really nice. We were able to recruit the participants, which was encouraging. People reported that they valued the groups, and we're starting to see some effects associated with the groups in the directions that we were heading. So from a research perspective, I think these types of studies start to suggest it might be good to do some bigger trials of these types of interventions. And I think from smart recovery and practice perspectives, hopefully it's validating and suggests that this is an area that's of relevance, that's important, that could have really important impacts on family members here in Australia and then potentially more broadly. So that's it. Thank you so much for listening. I'll stop sharing our slides now, and then we're really happy to answer some questions if there's any out there.
Thank you very much for this excellent presentation. As far as I've seen, there have been a few comments regarding problems with the accessibility of smart recovery programs in Australia. Maybe you would like to comment on that.
That was my question. I'm a trained smart recovery facilitator and wanted to do the Smart Family and Friends. I was in one of the major prisons here in Western Australia, but I haven't been able to access the training. Is it going to become available online for people to train in this? I've actually got the manual.
Great.
I was doing the Aboriginal thing within one of the prisons here as well. And I got the Be Smart manual. So, yeah, I mean, I love the program, just interested in, obviously can't do it without the training. So,
yeah. I think the biggest challenge that, many of us face is capacity. And even though, it is a worldwide model, we've only got a team of 6 in the whole of Australia. So we're always facing challenges with the capacity for training. And the difference between the family and friends one, in the sense that traditionally over the years, there needs to be enough interest for an advertised training to go ahead, or an organisation like Palmerston over in WA is a big player, or the Mental Health Commission have ran it over the years. If they're requesting training for 6-7 people, it's really easy for us to then either go over there or run one online to train for this amount of people. At the moment, we have online facilitator training, which is modules, but that's for normal facilitating. I would love to have the funds from somewhere to develop additional modules to that facilitator, which is a family and friends online training. So it's really, up until now, in the last few years, it's been reliant upon things like with Peter and the other piece of work that I mentioned, where we get some money or some grants so that we can, invest in some training stuff. So it's always a challenge, but not to say that it wouldn't happen. We've got another couple of trainers that are kind of on board this year. So we're hoping to look to maybe start advertising some that are more of a publicly registered, publicly advertised family friends. But yeah, always a challenge when you have a country the size of bigger than Europe and there's only 6 of us that cover the whole lot. Well, actually only 2 trainers. So
yeah, I actually did my refresher through Palmerston and met Joseph you know.
Excellent. Yeah.
But I was running it as an independent facilitator through, which I then took into one of the prisons here. So, yeah. So I will. I'm on the emailing list, so hopefully in the future.
Yeah, and just you would be able to find my my email address easily through Smart Recovery, and I can post it in here as well. But more than happy to have continual conversations with you if things come up and stuff, Joe, for sure.
Yeah, that would be great. I'm about to start some AOD online workshops, running over 12 weeks, evidence-based, and then using the SMART as a support. But yeah, I actually find quite often that a lot of it is the family and friends and their behaviour, which is enabling the behaviour of the, addict to sort of continue. So, like to wrap it around and have an all-encompassing. I mean, there are other things, but the Be Smart family and friends would be a good tool to have. So
absolutely.
I shall look out. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks. I see Jan has raised her hand.
Yes, thanks. Hi. So I'm a clinical psychologist working in a health and social care charity in the UK, Turning Point. And I'm interested in, it was interesting your comment, Dan, about, obviously we're not in competition with other models and people will use bits of whatever they want to, and that's helpful for them. And I'm just interested in your experience of how family members or affected others do that. And I suppose the question comes from the experience that sometimes I think in the UK, in a particular area, one family service is commissioned. So it will be like, that's your service for family members. And often family members don't get a choice of approach, because there's one service it's being commissioned. So that need is being kind of fulfilled, from the viewpoint of commissioners. Whereas I'm just interested in, what else is around in Australia and what's your experience of how people dip in and out of different models for family members?
Yeah, I think it's even not just with family members, but just even sometimes in general. I'm just looking at my experience over the years. I think because we have these other models that have been around for 80 years, or maybe Al-Anon is a little bit newer than the traditional AA 12 steps and stuff, but that's predominantly what is worldly known. So I find Smart Recovery relatively new to people's ears. So it is our job, obviously, to continue to promote that. And I guess we're getting into differences of mindsets and things, and I don't want to look at in any negative way. But Smart Recovery, in essence, we're trying to kind of reduce the stigma that can be attached to addiction, that it's not a disease and it's not something. So, I think that's always going to be a challenge in different countries. And I'm not sure, obviously, here in the UK, and I didn't necessarily do a lot of family and friends work over there as such. But I think we're always quite supportive of, if people come and have been attending other programs and they're getting some benefit in this area that Smart can't provide, then that can't be a bad thing. We always put it back on them that this is self-management, and what's going to work for Jan will not work for Gallus and will not work for Joe. And I guess it's just helping those people identify that and what that is. And yeah, I'm not sure of whether you just get one-stop shop in the UK and you get told what you should do, but in essence, I don't find that works. People need to explore this for themselves and equip themselves with whatever skills that they identify. It might be very different to someone else. I may have not even answered your question there, Jen.
No, it's interesting. It's just interesting to sort of hear how things are, in different places, isn't it? And what's available for people. And, I agree. I think this element of choice is, I think, sometimes underplayed for family members. It's played up much more for service users than it used to be.
Absolutely.
I think we're still, in early days in the UK in terms of how much choice family members get. And I think also the online bit, although I know everybody's not got the kit and not everybody likes online, opens up that a little bit, doesn't it? In terms of, I live in a particular geographical area, but actually I could dip into Smart Family and Friends or Five Step or Al-Anon online. So it's an interesting kind of opening up, isn't it?
We have to look at the positives of what has happened in the last 2 years with COVID and stuff. Yes, it's hindered some things, but I actually think it's benefited in many other areas. And we've had people engaging in smart recovery that have never ever been had the chance before, because now we have 60 odd meetings, and family and friends, we can get money and we get people trained. There's going to be more and more. We've even got a campaign that will be launched that we'll send to you guys. It's called Take On Addiction. It's a global campaign to try and start reducing the stigma attached to that and get people, involved in their own challenges, and try and just kind of raise the profile, because I think we're early days, very early days with it. I would absolutely agree.
Thank you.
Okay, there are also quite a lot of comments in the comments section, but Richard has got a question.
Okay, well, I'm happy to go last if there are other questions for other people. I've always got questions, as you know.
More comments and questions which people can read. Yeah.
Well, one question I spotted in the comments section is from Ed Zippler, who asked that family members often say to value meetings and talking to others in similar situations, yet he wonders if you have used the self-help book on its own.
Well, we have had family members say that, and we do see purchase orders coming through for family and friends, but yet, we've found out that these individuals have never attended a family, a course or an online meeting, and that's okay, because if anyone has been able to look at the manual, I think it's a really good resource, and it's set up in a way that you can pretty much go through all the steps of that and start challenging yourself. So whether it's a self-help, self-management, whatever term it is, but there is a useful resource there that people can methodically go through. And I think that's the way you learn, then that will be really effective. If you need to learn from other people as well, then there is that opportunity too. But I definitely think there is value in it for sure. But I think a big part of the family and friends, and as we saw, I think it was said in that testimony, people feel quite isolated and quite alone. They feel like they're the only people going through this. So that's really powerful, just to sit in a room and, gee whiz, I'm not odd, or I'm not weird, or I'm actually, there's so many people going through this, and that really helps me kind of start a foundation of my own process.
Okay, then, before I hand over to Richard, there have also been several comments by Dave and Tina, and one which I found as a question is about the beginning of SMART, which the question is, it has been around for 25 years. I don't know if you want to comment something on that, Dave.
Well, I think, in some ways you could say that 25 years is not young, but when I was 25, I thought I was still quite young. I guess I'm referencing that the model of AA has been around for nearly 80 years, and there is a global uptake in it, and I think the big part of it has been through the volunteers and peers. That's what's made AA so successful, and it's interesting in Australia, for instance. Yes, we have peers and volunteers, but actually it's adopted more by organisations, and so we're continually, and again, if we're limited by funding, we don't have certain resources. It's difficult to get you to that level of where people are aware of it. So that's why I guess I'm saying, yes, it's been around for that long in America. It's only been around for 15 years or less, and a little bit more actually in Australia. But we've had such limited resources. Literally, the only way that smart recovery existed in Australia was due to one person, which is a private benefactor that just had experience of this in his own family and his own friends, and has helped fund smart recovery. We have only ever had one government funding of significance, and that was last year, to develop our online program. Hence how we had 70 meetings, because we only had 3 or 4. So the challenge is us getting to that point where actually governments funding are listening to the research and things that Peter and the other researchers are coming up with, because that's what will build the notoriety and the awareness of it, so that governments start investing in programs like this that build sustainable life change rather than policing and law and all these other law reform stuff that's never worked. So we've got to ask ourselves, some of those challenges. So yeah, 25 years, it's been a long time in America. It started, but it's slow pickings because we have so little resources. So that's why we're hoping this global campaign that we'll be launching will start to platform it into a different sphere.
Okay, so I'll hand over to Richard.
Well, I've got questions for both Pete and Dan, but just to say that I think this issue of getting a research base is incredibly important, because that's one of the ways that you get funders and policymakers to actually listen. So if you can demonstrate that what you're doing has some effectiveness. So one of the things that we are very strong on in AFINet is trying to develop a partnership between providers and researchers and policymakers, so that we're all actually starting to sing from the same hymn sheet rather than being in some ways in opposition to each other. Let me ask some research questions first to Pete, because you've had very few questions coming your way so far. The first one is about why I know a small number, but why the small number didn't engage, and were you able to do any follow-up with those people who had said that they wanted to participate? So one person didn't even manage to make it into the first meeting, and then a few other, very small numbers, but a few others dropped out. Were you able to get any feedback about why?
Limited feedback. So yeah, I think a handful of it with just the online groups just weren't for them, and I think a handful of people just life took over and life was busy. Potentially it was maybe the Smart Family and Friends program wasn't for them, but they didn't necessarily say that to us. So it's limited information. I guess to put it into perspective, if we were running face-to-face groups or any group study that I've ever been involved in, 13% of people not engaging, I would have been really happy with. Often it's much higher than that. So it seems like it's a relatively small number. And
it is, and you always get dropouts. Absolutely, you get dropouts of individual counselling and therapy. You get dropouts from group work. You get dropouts from online, from face to face, and so on. But sometimes you can get some feedback from those people about why, and there may be things that you can learn from that, which will help just improve and streamline the program. Okay,
we got my interviews with some of them, so it'll. Yeah, as we tease that out, I think it'll be good. Sorry, Richard, keep going.
No, my second question is just about how important the improvements are. I mean, quite understandably, I've been in your position many times. One headlines on the good news, and the good news is that people's symptoms reduced and their well-being increased and their overall burden reduced, and these were all statistically significant, which is great. But I suppose I'm always interested in the relationship between statistical significance and clinical significance. So I noticed, for example, on the well-being increasing, it went up from 28.6 to 30.4. So less than a 2-point rise from 28.5 up to just over 30. The symptoms went down from 24.3 to 20.6, so a slightly bigger one, but still, I suppose my question, similarly with burden, although burden increased, it reduced even more. But I suppose my question is, how important are these changes?
It's a very good question, and I think writing up the results and talking about it, it's thinking about it with a grain of salt. We could absolutely look at the proportion of people that are demonstrating clinical change or reliable change, and I think that would be a sensible thing to do. It gets a little tricky when you're working with such small numbers.
Absolutely. But I mean, I think maybe dividing the group up into those people who did change and those people who didn't might be an interesting way. I mean, it may be that everybody changed by a relatively small amount, or it may be that a few people didn't change, and that might come out in some of the qualitative work about why they didn't, and other people changed much more significantly. One of the problems with the sort of research that often gets published, and therefore people are more interested in reading about, is the meaning of, not the meaning, but looking at the means. The meaning of results, and I think looking at the means can be very helpful, but sometimes it can obscure some really interesting and important differences. So yeah, I'll be interested when you get around to doing that.
Yeah, I agree completely. What I think is the most interesting results is the interviews of people prior to accessing these groups and at the follow-up. And that's, I've given sort of a snapshot, but we really need to analyze that properly. I think that's where the most interesting information is going to come through. And your point about the people that maybe demonstrated, reliable or clinically significant change compared to people that didn't, it might be interesting to compare some of their qualitative reflections on that as well. And that might help explain some of it. Really, really sensible and good points, Richard.
Yeah. Well, I think, as you know, in our work, we've always interleaved quantitative and qualitative work, and the qualitative, we're actually hearing from people about their experiences. And as Breda just put in a comment, actually the courage of people to even come forward and start talking about how difficult their lives are, and hopefully the change, so that they don't blame themselves as much as they might have done before. But obviously when they come forward, it is before, and in the before, then they are often very much feeling that this is somehow their fault, they've done things wrong, and it takes a lot of courage to then go and join in with other people to in a sense, admit that before the program hopefully starts to help people that it's not something they need to admit to.
Couldn't agree more. It was heartwarming to talk to some of those participants who were willing to come forward, and the praise that they gave to Smart Recovery and Ange, who was running the groups. It was a nice study and a nice experience to be involved. Yeah. It's a good point.
Okay, Dan, can I just ask a question or two to you? I think the comment that you gave, reply you gave to Joe about training is a very interesting one. It's exactly the problem that we've had in thinking about the 5-step method. We generally have delivered training in the 5-step method for organizations that have come forward and said, we would like you to come and train our team, or we as an organization, so Jan's organization Turning Point says, we want to adopt the 5-step method, and so we will run a training course within our organization. It's been much more difficult when individuals come and say, I would like to be trained. I would like to use the 5-step method or Smart Recovery in a group I want to run, or in my individual work. Because that you need a significant number of people to be able to make it viable to run the course. We've done that a few times, but it's been really quite difficult. Interestingly, the advent of doing everything online has made us rethink this very, very significantly. And we've done a lot of work over the last 2 years in terms of trying to develop a lot of our training being online based, as opposed to, and even that people can self-direct their own training. And then how you integrate that, the practice and the supervision of practice, which needs to go on as part of the training. So I'm interested in whether you've been thinking in SMART of developing the Family and Friends program as a more self-directed or online version. You're muted, Dan.
And here's me giving Pete a hard time earlier on, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I think that's the very nature of the grant that Dr. Ali Beck has been involved in just recently. So take a step back, I guess, and there's been some comments on it. It may be different in every country as well, but because predominantly a lot of services were approaching the normal Smart Recovery and also Smart Recovery Family Friends, they would have a training budget to deliver certain services, and we would provide that training and the support that then subsequently is involved after that. When it comes to volunteers and peers, what we have done in regards to just traditional smart recovery is that we're trying to help facilitators identify peers in the program to start mentoring them, and when they reach a certain ability, as I say, not necessarily abstinence, but 9 months of some stable demonstrated behavioural change, then we will be looking to train them either face-to-face or online, if they're face-to-face, but if not online, for very nominal cost, like $25 or something. So we've been really trying to invest in that peer workforce, not workforce, but peer volunteers, because we do recognise that compared to America, which like AA and also Smart Recovery is heavily volunteer driven. So it's been successful because of that. And yes, it's been heavily service driven over here, but we're starting to acknowledge that the peers that come through the program and how we can invest in them. Now, because of the limited resources, family and friends of Smart Recovery is in essence the main model, and everything that's informed from that is in family and friends as well. But this ADF grant, for example, is about building peer and provider capacity to deliver it. So it's about training facilitators. Now, not all of these facilitators are services. Some are peers. Some of them have come through the family and friends program recently, or have had family members and be experiencing that. So they have been trained, and they're going to be looking at them running these as peers and also providers, and longer term, what ways that we can develop and evaluate and develop a better framework so that that can be a model that we can continue using, and really support people to do this training at nominal or little cost, like what we've tried to do in the normal facilitator training, which is very powerful, having those peers and those people involved from the grassroots of it.
Can I ask one more question, and then I'll shut up? And this is again to Dan. It's about how Smart is funded. I had understood, and maybe I clearly I've understood it wrong. I had thought that there was an element of people paying to participate, but you're saying clearly it's free.
No, the only aspect is the training. And as I can, because it's not for profit, there is very little. Obviously, at the end of any not-for-profit process, you don't make profit. That's what NGOs are about. So it's the training aspect of it. There is no cost to any family members or any participants to attend. The only thing that may be a cost is if they wanted to purchase one of the handbooks on the website. But everything else is free for the participants that are actually receiving the support.
So the facilitators of both the general Smart Recovery and the Family and Friends program need some sort of funding in order to pay for the training, and I can understand why that is. And then they offer it for free.
Yes.
So,
yes. Yeah.
Right.
What the only thing within that, and it's probably similar to normal group processes or experiences, is some facilitators may ask for a gold coin donation at the meeting. Now, not online, I wouldn't, but if I'm a family member that's running it in a community centre and it's costing me $50 to run it because I have to pay the community centre, or I'm putting teas and coffees on, it's just a nominal chip in for some teas and coffees, that kind of stuff. That's the only thing, but it's not expected by any means.
Thank you.
Okay, I would also like to ask one question, which is a bit based on several comments I've seen, and I'm really interested also in reach regarding family members, and I wonder, since you switched to the online version, I would say, according to my understanding, this has got two sides, because which has also been mentioned is shame and stigma are very large barriers for accessing help, and probably they might be minimized if you have got online options. So I just wonder if you have, as a part of your qualitative study, any data regarding how your family members accepted the online version, or even if they found it to be a facilitator to seek help?
Yeah, I'll have a go at this, Dan, but yeah, jump in if you want. The people that participated in the study really liked the online. They really valued it, and I think it brought people literally from across the country into the same group. So people that wouldn't have ever been able to access the groups that in the studies that we were doing were all of a sudden able to do this. I think likewise people appreciated being in a group with people outside of their local community. I think it gave them a certain freedom or ability to talk. So the feedback from the participants was overwhelmingly very, very positive in terms of the online aspect. However, for sure, there'd be a proportion of people who didn't sign up to be involved in the study because they just weren't interested in the online version. And potentially some of the people that dropped out didn't appreciate the online aspect as well. I suspect the way forward is both. So having online groups available to people and having face-to-face groups available to people, I suspect that would be the best approach.
And I'll just comment on that, which would be an interesting a piece of data, I guess, Gallus, that when we were collecting data when predominantly smart recovery was face-to-face, it was about 60% male and 40% female. And when we started running online meetings, that flipped. Now, it balanced out a little bit, but we were hastened to guess, perhaps the dual roles of women and the demands and the different things that are put upon them. But also we were finding from male and female and people like teachers and different people attending these online sessions that they could never, ever go to a face-to-face meeting. Like that would just destroy their career. So we were finding that the people were engaging for different reasons. Now, I would have to check, but the online project that we were running last year, as I say, Dr. Ali Beck did an evaluation study of the online project. And part of that was assessing those that had attended face-to-face. And they said that the cohesion that was developed, I think, from online face-to-face was very comparable. But that's, that could be muddied waters because we don't always know if they've experienced both, So, but like, I think there will be people that will hate it. But if you have no choice and you're stuck in your house and there's no one else to support, then we have to accept that sometimes. I like running face-to-face training. I like online, but for very different reasons. But I think there will be rationale for the individual, what they attend and why they attend it, I think.
Okay, just one brief comment. I also would like to say that I think the dropout rates you had in your study are excellent if you compare it to other online-based treatments where you quite often have dropout rates of far below, above 50%. So I think also this is an important issue, but I'll hand over to Richard.
Just a very quick one. I mean, Pete, were all the participants from Australia?
Yes.
Yeah. I just wonder, next time you do a presentation, given one of the things you're saying about how online made it much more accessible, is to just have a little map of Australia and show where all the participants were from. If you could demonstrate that actually the geographical spread was much wider than you would have expected. I mean, obviously, if you do that and you find that's not the case, forget the idea. But if it is the case, I mean, that's a very nice graphical representation of what happens when you move online and you find people, particularly if you've got people in outback areas, that would be really fantastic.
Yeah, great idea. We will do that.
Wonderful. I think we're already quite approaching the end. If I look at the time, and I know it's late in Australia. So again, like always at the webinars, there has been a lot of exchange in the chat, and I would like to thank everyone who wrote something there. I think it's really important as a part of networking which is taking place. I would really like to thank you very much for your excellent presentation and wish you best success in further disseminating the smart recovery approach in Australia and get the necessary funding to do some good research on that. And in the end, I also would like to announce that on the 22nd of March, the next AFINet webinar will take place, and this also will be on a different time slot. It'll be at 4 p.m. UK time. And Joël Tremblay from Canada will have a talk about a new model of couples treatment for addiction. So I would also strongly recommend you all to register for that. And again, thank you very much, and big thanks to Richard and Alex for making this webinar possible. And we will send around some information regarding our planned virtual, here we are again, AFINet conference in September. And it would be great if anyone who is doing some research on family issues they could submit abstracts and giving another forum for exchanging and networking them. So I would say good night to Australia, and I don't know, probably good morning to the US or whatever. And it's been a real pleasure for having you all.
Absolutely.
And hopefully see you on the 22nd of March. Thank you.
Thank you, Gallus. Thank you, Dan and Pete. Brilliant. Really excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.